Join us today for a, I guess, retrospective look at the Star Trek films, primarily the 6 original series films, although I wouldn't be surprised if we would mention some of the others, but we're going to be focusing on the original 6. Welcome back to those who've been here before. Welcome to those of you who are new to the channel. This is the Geek Cabal channel. I'm Bobby. This is Jim, who's been in a couple other videos. Normally have 2 other folks, Brad and Chad. Perpetual scheduling issues have made that difficult. So Jim's here. Not just for that reason. Jim's much bigger, unless I'm totally mistaken on one of the 2 of them, Jim's a much bigger Star Trek fan than 2 of them. And I consider myself a big Star Trek fan, but I believe Jim's probably the bigger fan here, so, yeah. So anyway, and just before we get started, I'd like to thank everyone who actually watches these videos, and especially those of you who comment, so we get some kind of idea what you guys actually like and dislike and want to see more of. So thank you for all you folks that do that. But yeah, so here we go.
What makes you think I'm the bigger fan? Do you think the fact that I have
yes.
Star Trek on obscure video formats?
Yeah, that's part of it. Why don't you before we get started, why don't you tell us what these are here?
These are actually a movie format called RCA Select Division. It came out about the same time as Laserdisc. I believe kind of the inspiration for the design of these was to look like records, so that you could have them on the shelf, store them in the same way that you would store records and all of that.
Okay.
But they have their own special player that they have to play in. You don't actually take the media out of this. The machine actually pulls the media out and then just leaves the empty shell for you.
Okay.
And also double-sided, so like the Star Trek movie is actually 2 discs double-sided.
Okay. And now the whole movie, you had another one. Is the motion pictures actually spread across 2 of these?
Two of them, 4 sides.
Okay.
So yes, in the middle of it, you do have to flip it and to view the other parts of the movie.
Gotcha. And then that is for the motion picture, which is the
Yes.
first of the original series movies. And this is for the Menagerie, which was the pilot episode for the original series?
Yes, before the Kirk, it was the one with Pike in it.
All right. But yes, for things like this, let's see, the fact that I know you've watched all of Enterprise, I know I haven't. You've watched some or all of Lower Decks, and I haven't.
The only series I have not been able to get through is Discovery.
Well,
And
that seems to be a common complaint, so I'm not going to hold that against you, because I can't either. I got to season 2.
And it's not that Paramount can't make a good show, because I think Strange New Worlds is a very well done show.
I'm only about 4 episodes in so far, but I like what I've seen. So,
anyways, now we're already getting off topic.
Yeah. All right. So, just a few things before we get into actually explaining the plots and whatnot behind the movies. Unlike a lot of movie series, the Star Trek movies actually do have a consistent naming and numbering scheme, at least the original series ones do. Now, obviously, whenever the motion picture was released, they didn't call it Part 1. But presumably somewhere around when there was a Part 2, it was numbered Part 1, the motion picture. And each of them has a number and a subtitle. So Part 2 is The Wrath of Khan, 3 is The Search for Spock, 4 is The Voyage Home, 5 is The Final Frontier, and 6 is The Undiscovered Country. And they all use Roman numerals. So, yeah, that's nice, as opposed to, say, modern franchises like, I don't know, the Fast and Furious franchise, which I think even has 2 movies with the same name in it. But, or the Alien franchise that can't decide if it's going to be subtitles, additional letters, or numbers. It just says yes to that question. So consistent naming and numbering is nice.
And I believe that with the Star Trek Generations, I believe it was back and forth if they were actually called Star Trek 7 Generations.
Yeah, I do see people online refer to them to continue the numbering because because of Generations, it is a continuation. Kirk is in it, so well, along with several others in the very beginning, but mainly Kirk in the bridge. But yeah, so anyway, we're going to kind of briefly explain each of the movies, and we're going to talk a little bit about the box office because there's some interesting things there. So as I mentioned, the first movie is Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Jim, I know you watched that far more recently than I did, so if you want to give kind of just a brief plot summary on that one.
Obviously, spoilers if you haven't watched any of these, but the motion picture takes place right before they're getting ready to, I guess, rechristen the Enterprise as the Constitution refit. And a distress call comes from a couple of Klingon battle cruisers that were under attack. Well, technically they attacked first, but and after they get wiped out, they realize that this thing that took them out was on a trajectory straight for Earth, and just what the rest of the plot just kind of goes along with them getting the ship ready and then flying to intercept and try to figure out what's going on. I wish there was more story than that, but it's really not. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do really appreciate the ending of it because I'm also a big NASA fan, especially old NASA, and the fact that this came out in '79. And 77, I believe, is when the Voyager probes were launched.
Also when the Star Wars franchise was launched.
Yes. So it was kind of nice to actually see that they make mention of the Voyager probe in the movie.
I was going to say, I think it's okay to spoil a movie that's like 40 years old.
You never know. There may be somebody out there that raises their fist at me because
All right. I will solve all our problems. Folks, these movies all came out several decades ago. There will be spoilers. You have been warned. For the younger folks out there who haven't seen them, I'm sorry. For everyone else, you had your chance to watch them. So, go on.
All right. So, obviously, what I'm leading at is that the main alien ship, piloted by V'ger, is obviously the Voyager space probe.
Yeah, it encountered some race of machines.
Yep.
Out in the beyond.
It could have been the Borg if somebody would have just really thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, like the end of this is definitely like the perfect, well, here's where the Borg come from moment. But yeah, the probe finds a race of machines, and they send it back to its maker, but they, encased it in a significantly larger shell. And so this is the first time we see the Klingons as we know them in the Next Generation and the later Star Trek movies. Because in the original series, it was really just some makeup and certain facial hair. And I mean, they basically look human. Whereas here's where you see them with the very pronounced ridge here on their forehead. And, so you have that. Bizarre Starfleet uniforms that we only ever see in this movie.
And thank God that was... because I think at least later they kind of said, you know what, people aren't going to be dressing in like they're from the 70s, in the future, so let's at least try to give it some sort of uniform aesthetic to it.
That is one thing I love about futuristic movies from the 70s. They just assumed that 70s fashion was never going to end. Those deluded fools. Although, the way trends go, maybe at that point in the future it's back for the 100th time. Who knows? Some interesting box office figures. The budget for the original motion picture was $35 million, and its final take was $82.6 million. So by Hollywood math, it probably did actually make money, just not very much. At least in the modern era, typically you have to double your budget. Now that's before the last 10, 15 years where advertising budgets have gotten to be as big as the actual production budget. so you really have to triple your budget to make any money. But so I'd imagine a movie from the '70s that probably did actually make money. However, once we get talking about the next movie, you'll see that it probably didn't make a lot of money.
So, and one of the things that they were able to, that they did with this was that they made a visual effects just everywhere. I mean, they built a whole new model of the Enterprise. They took a lot of, I say, risk in the special effects department, trying to do some stuff that was very trippy looking. And
Is that like Spock's journey into the where he's flying in?
yes, yes. And there were some special effects that don't hold up, really that well, like the ones where they're trying to show, from outer space into a shuttle view. And I mean, obviously you can tell that those people aren't in the shuttle. I mean, it's one of those. It's like, I think when George Lucas made Star Wars, he's like, the special effects in this department aren't quite there yet. We're not going to show people in their cockpits from outside, and that's why none of them do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with a little cleanup work, you could probably make it look a little bit better still with the original footage in there. But I mean, yeah, like the new model, and the great thing about the new model is that they were able to reuse that model for the rest of the movies and not have to, spend the budget on, building all these new sets and models and different things. But yeah, it's just like, it was just a big glamour shot to visual effects. It's just unfortunate that the story didn't really fit well with it.
Yeah. And kind of speaking of the story, this one is probably the most like sci-fi of the movies, right? Like the high concept sci-fi stuff. The others come back down to a lot more interpersonal kind of things that happen, with sci-fi trappings. Whereas this one's, the big space concepts and things like that.
Well, this one,
At least from my memory.
I'd say the fourth one was also, very similar to something, another probe coming to Earth, but little different situation on that one. But anyways, but no, there was one scene in particular that really, really drug me out of. I don't know if you remember it, but like I said, the Enterprise had just went through its refit, and they're getting ready to go into, go to warp for the first time, and they keep on talking about, well, we haven't run enough simulations. The simulations are, not complete, And for some reason, when they do go to warp, it immediately gets pulled into a black hole a wormhole. Gets pulled into a wormhole, and there's that whole scene where they're all like slow motion, bouncing, weird red streets.
Oh, yeah. I most of what I remember is from towards the end of the movie. It's been a while since I've watched it.
And it didn't really serve any purpose. The only purpose it did is it disabled the ship long enough for Spock somehow to find where they were at, board the ship, and then realign all the, the warp stuff and get the warp drive to work.
Yeah, that's right. Spock does just kind of meet them somewhere. It's been a while. Had he left Starfleet and was coming back, or what was the
Kolinar? He went to Vulcan to do the ritual of purging all emotions.
Okay.
And then the probe spoke to him, unless he's been speaking to his human half, is I think is what they said. And he's the only one that could hear it, so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, there you go.
I think it makes sense. The overall plot is good. It's just, and I'm not saying that everything has to be nonstop action. It doesn't have to be, the Star Trek reboot by any means. But at some point, story material has to be there to carry it on. When I think the movie itself could be literally half as long and still have all of the same plot points in there.
Well, to quote another YouTube video, I'm going to mangle this quote, I'm sure. So from Red Letter Media, where he describes the motion picture, and in his opinion, this was like, if I recall correctly, he considers this the best Star Trek movie because it's a sci-fi movie. And he's like, I like my sci-fi slow. I want to be able to leave the house, go to the grocery store, get my tires rotated and balanced, grab something to eat, come back, and not have missed anything because of how slow the story is going. So, take that for what you will. Older sci-fi movies are slow. like high concept sci-fi movies typically are slow. So anyway, that's the first movie.
Like I say, the everything that we said here is the reason why the second movie, The Wrath of Khan,
Yeah.
had to scale everything back budget-wise, and because they threw all this money at it and were expecting, I don't know, I guess they were expecting Star Wars level movie.
That's what
returns.
I'm assuming. That they were probably thinking, hey, Star Wars was a hit. We're a known property. Sure, it was from the 60s, but everyone knew Star Trek. And we'll big budget movie. We'll make it basically like a big budget double length episode of the show. And it'll work. And it's like, no, it won't. It did. It made money, but not much. So, then we have the Star Trek movie that everybody knows, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And this is the one that, in my opinion, this is the one that figured out the formula for how to make the movies work. And to tell you just briefly, this movie had an $11.2 million budget. That's a third of the motion pictures budget. Yet made $79.8 million. Just barely short of the motion picture. So, made over 7 times its budget. So, it succeeded. Which actually, before we get a whole lot farther, you're going to notice as I ramble these numbers off, there's really only 1 or 2 of these movies that are super successful. Most of them are just successful. This is a thing. That these Star Trek movies, at least these 6, just don't do Star Wars numbers. This is the thing. But anyway, The Wrath of Khan. So here begins where we see another new set of Federation uniforms, but these continue all the way through the end of 6, and we would see them in some of the episodes of the Next Generation that have all the older ships that are somehow pulled forward in time, like the Enterprise C, if I remember the one episode.
Yep.
They still have this style of uniform. So this one, I'm assuming we're led to believe this is the uniform that's right up to whenever they switch to the Next Generation uniforms. So these hold over. We start to see, I don't think Sarek's in this one. He's in the third one. Is Sarek in this one? I know he's in the third one.
No, because he's not in this one, obviously, because what happens at the end, he's in the beginning of the third one.
But yeah, so this one kind of, this is where the trajectory of the movies changes. This movie is a lot more, I don't want to say personal, but it kind of is. This is the one where they figured out, like I said, the formula. And the formula is this. Successful sci-fi things come in 2 varieties. There's either the hardcore science sci-fi that ticks all the right boxes and 10 people really love it and everyone else is just awe-inspired by what they're seeing. That's one way to do it. The other is to realize that all of that is just the backdrop and the story is really about humanity, what it is to be human, and it uses the high-tech setting, the futuristic, the whatever, to extrapolate and expand upon some aspect of humanity. In this particular case, it's getting old. In fact, that's the case in all of the successful Star Trek movies. It's about getting old. And this one in particular, the aspect is sins of the past come back to bite you in the ass in the name of the shape of Khan in this particular case. For those of you who are unaware, somehow, he's a villain from the original series. And because he's an enhanced superhuman, significantly smarter, significantly stronger, and more durable. So even though Kirk and the whole rest of the crew has been getting older, Khan has too, but Khan is still just as strong, still just as smart, and still just as deadly. So he's the past that now old man Kirk, Spock, McCoy, etc. are going to have to deal with, who's every bit the threat he was 20, 30 years ago whenever they left him on City Alpha whichever one didn't blow up. 6, I think.
Yes, because because in the movie, what happens is that because of an explosion or
I think a comet or asteroid hit the one that they're surveying, and they think it's the dead one. And the dead one was hit by a comet or asteroid or something and knocked the one that Khan and his crew are on off its axis, and now it's just a dead wasteland.
Yeah, but I think it knocked it into a similar orbit as the dead planet.
Yeah, probably.
But to that point, I mean, do you think they should have ever been looking at that planet as, because of there being a
Well, I
inhabited?
think the implication is that Kirk never reported what happened, because the moment they entered the system, there should have been like hey, don't go to this planet. Like, there's a genocidal madman there who's probably still alive and may or may not be pissed off.
Yeah.
And the other captain, I can't think of his name, that Chekhov was serving under, which does lead to one of the only plot holes in some of these movies, potential plot holes. Khan instantly recognizes Chekhov. Chekhov is not in the episode that Khan is in. Chekhov could have been a crewman on the ship, and just not the ensign on the bridge, and due to Khan's superior intellect, might still just remember him. But the implication is that he actually interacted with him, and he's like the one main crew member he did not. So, but then again, it's a movie released in 1982. It's a sequel to an episode from 1967, probably. I think they probably figured no one remembered from 15 years prior, and they're right. But yeah, Khan is a genuine threat and a reminder of past mistakes. But that also comes up in the form of Dr. Carol Marcus and finding out that Kirk has a son that apparently he's known about and has never spoken of. So there's all kinds of these little past mistakes and all kinds of little bits about getting older and having to deal with the mistakes in the past. Kirk was promoted to an admiral, right?
Yes.
Before this, he's doing a tour of the ship, and it's because he's getting ready to set out on a training voyage. Because Spock's the captain, right? Technically.
Yes, because it was a training crew. Because that also leads to one of the dumbest moments in the entire movie. Later in the movie, when they take on damage, and for whatever reason, Scotty drags the corpse of one of the trainees from engineering to the bridge.
Oh yeah. That's one of those, like, it's dramatic for movie purposes, but if you think about it, it's a stupid scene kind of things.
Because he's like, I'm going to pass by, the sick bay and everything else, and
I'm going to show Kirk, who knows damn good and well what a dead body looks like at this point.
he's seen enough red shirts.
Yeah. You think it was intentional that the uniforms turned everyone into a red shirt? Because they lost the colorations, they were all red uniforms from that on. But so the movie also features the Genesis device, which is a device that will transform a dead planet into a planet with life. But it's McCoy that points out, okay, but what happens if you use it on a planet that already has life? And you're like, well, it'll be converted into new life. I don't remember what Spock's exact words were. McCoy's just like, oh, it'll just be converted, huh? I think they call that genocide, Spock, or something like that. It's like, well, there's no need to get upset about it, Doctor, And so it's McCoy is the one that realizes, like, this is an apocalyptic weapon. This is not the kind of thing that, like, they should even contemplate be messing with, because someone will turn it into a weapon. Which, as we find out in Picard, Season 3, Section 31 has a functioning model of it, apparently, and just hasn't unleashed it yet on anybody. So, there you go. Plus, a little spoiler for the next movie, that is it Kluge? Kruge, the Klingon, Christopher Lloyd's character? Krug. That's like his driving motivation, is he realizes this is a weapon, and the Federation's just going to use it against the Klingons and wipe them out, because they're not going to have any defense against it. So, yeah. But because of its unique properties, it also helps set the rest of the franchise in motion after this. Because the battle at the end is not without loss. Spock does have to sacrifice himself to save the ship, to fix something in the dilithium chamber. Gets a lethal dose of radiation. And, you actually get to see William Shatner really actually put some effort into acting. And he can actually pull it off, folks.
Oh yes, I definitely shed a tear or two at the end of that. That speech is right here.
Yeah, the speech and the when Spock's dying moment, like those 2 points are that's pure, like, that's actually attempting to act William Shatner, not as usual just cocky, smarmy smile and working his way through everything. And that's also kind of part of the plot, because they talk about the Kobayashi Maru at the very beginning, and you find out that Kirk is the only one who's ever beaten the scenario. And I'm pretty sure Spock knows, if I recall correctly, how he beat it.
Yeah.
When they're talking to Savick, and because Kirk's like, well, it had the novel benefit of having never been tried, and you find out that he cheated. He reprogrammed the simulator, and so Spock had never taken it. And at the end, whenever he's dying, that's what it says to Kirk. Is like, what do you think of my solution? Because they were in a no-win situation. And Kirk's whole deal is he didn't believe in a no-win situation. And he was finally faced with one. And it cost him his best friend. And, like his son at the end realizes just how devastated Kirk really is. That obviously he's lost crewmen before, but never anyone that close. And then they fire Spock's body down to the planet in a giant sunglass case.
That makes you wonder, though, if Spock had any inclination on why he did the mind meld at the.
Well, I think it's because he knew he was going to die, and so I don't think he did it thinking, well, as long as they shoot me down, they're all resurrected. I think it was the whole why we see Sarek in the third movie.
And I think that it has.
It's just he didn't have time to explain to Bones what he was doing.
Yeah, I think it's part of the Vulcan thing that as they were transferred from this life to the next, that they. So that also makes me wonder. Well, no, because he pretty much put his soul into.
Yeah, that's the explanation is the logic version of it, but essentially, yeah. But that's like something I mentioned before, that it's odd that, to my mind, a lot of Star Trek does come off with an atheist bent to it, because the Federation typically is like, oh, those silly backwards folks and their religions. Meanwhile, we have the Vulcans, the uber logic-driven people, and they've got all these kind of religious ceremonies and statues, and they're burning incense everywhere. And I'm just wondering if that was a subtle message from Gene, like, well, yeah, logically there is a God. Like, the Vulcans have figured it out. The humans will get back to it eventually. Because, like, the original series makes some references. The episode where they go to the planet that basically Rome rules everything, but it's the modern day, it's like the 60s. But Rome basically rules the world. And as they're leaving, they're talking about how the people were talking about the sun. And they're like, well, the Romans didn't have a sun god. And Uhura's like, no, not a sun god, the son of God, Jesus. And because that was a very transformative moment in the Roman Empire whenever they converted to Christianity. And they were implying that now it's just going to happen. It's going to happen on that planet too, just 2,000 years later. So, or however many years. And so, like that was a very pro-Christian message, and it's really like the next generation onward that you get the what I view as a more atheist message. Although then Deep Space Nine, they run into actual gods. So, maybe not. Maybe I'm just like reading too much into the next generation or something. But
getting back to the Wrath of Khan itself, honestly, I think out of the original series, I think it's still probably my favorite. It's, I don't know. It's a toss it between that one and the sixth one.
Yeah, probably.
But I think, just overall, and you know, they were able to drive the plot forward because they kind of knew that, you know, the time that they had to defeat Khan was very, very minimal because, you know, the leverage that they had would have been, you know, slowly overcome with his intellect, trying to figure out
Right.
how to, you know, actually battle in space.
Right, because they knew they were fighting a superior tactician, and it was only Spock's realization that Khan's main weakness was he's used to two-dimensional fighting, not a three-dimensional space in space. You know, that was Kirk's advantage, is that he does know how to fight in space, and because otherwise, Khan would have eventually come around to that.
But, you know, I mean, the way that they, when the ship was damaged and they had to covertly explain how long it's going to take to fix the ship, even as a kid, I always thought, well, they pretty much just immediately said the legend of, okay, for, days will seem like hours, or hours will seem like days.
Right. Yeah, well, I chalked that one up to, while Khan does have the superior intellect, Khan also has the
Ego.
the superior ego, and could even contemplate that they would even, that in that dire scenario that they'd sent there and be like, okay, now let's work out this code for when they were on the radio. He's thinking, haha, I've got him, So, that happens.
But no, I mean, just the acting was, was good.
It's Ricardo Montalban and his fake chest plate. For those of you at home that don't know, Ricardo Montalban was not that buff. that is very much a giant.
I mean, even his own crew, had natural reactions like, "Hey, we've got a ship, we can leave now, we can go," but at the same time, weren't going to abandon their leader,
Right. Well, is in a very on-the-nose metaphor, given what he was saying towards the end.
Moby Dick.
Yeah, he was
Ahab,
and he's going to destroy himself trying to exact his revenge. So I should read that book someday. But this was also the beginning of the trend of the even-numbered movies were the good ones. The odd-numbered movies, not as much. And I don't know how and why that worked out that way. But that just seems to be the way it works for these 6.
Though I will say that 3 was probably one of the best odd number movies.
Yeah, that's definitely better than 5.
When you go to the Next Generation and so on, I think. Well, then you get the weird one with the reboot. That the second one was the worst of.
Yeah, but that's the other franchise. Because Generations it's okay. First Contact is probably the best one. Insurrection is probably definitely the worst one. And then Nemesis is just, I like Nemesis, but a lot of people didn't. I don't know.
Now, neat fact, I believe it was the second one was is when Industrial Light and Magic actually took over doing the special effects, and they took the model from the motion picture, and I believe they had to repaint it or doll it up because it wouldn't work with the blue screen effects that they were using. I could be wrong on that, but I do know that ILM did pick up after the motion picture. That's one thing I was actually looking into.
Yeah.
Because I knew at some point they did, which is always, ironic. But at the same time, I think Star Wars has a lot to, account for what Star Trek led the way with.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so that's pretty much, I'm sure we could probably do a video just entirely on the Wrath of Khan, but we need to move on. Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which I don't really know why it has that particular title, because we know where he is, and they know where he is.
Well, I guess they weren't expecting his body to move.
Yeah, that's true.
Also, I'm not sure exactly why the torpedo soft landed on a planet.
Why do you revert to a child?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's a lot of questions. It's probably best if we just don't ask.
Why did Saavik have to
not become not Kirstie Alley anymore.
Well, and help Spock go through his first pon farr.
Yeah. So Star Trek 3 had a budget of $17 million, so a little bit more than The Wrath of Khan, and it made a little bit less, $76.4 million. So overall, I'm sure it was also still considered a success. By those numbers, that's what, probably about 4 times as much of its budget. So, from my very, very quick math there. But yeah, so first of all, notably, Saavik, who was played by Kirstie Alley in Star Trek 2, is all of a sudden played by someone else in this movie. I don't know this actress's name off the top of my head. And Sarek, who I'm assuming it's the guy from the original series that
Yes.
played him, right? Yeah. Sarek shows up asking Kirk if Spock performed this particular ritual, and I can't recall the name of it. But essentially, what we were talking about for part 2, it's he transferred his mind, his essence, his soul, if you will, into someone else, and Vulcans do that when they know they're going to die, so they can transfer it to like the overmind, the well of souls, the whatever back on Vulcan, where it can join with the others, essentially. And so Sarah comes to Kirk because Kirk is Spock's friend. You know, Kirk, he knows Kirk is his best friend, and Kirk's just like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Sarah. Like, news to me, buddy. And so they're like, well, Spock surely would have done this. And they look at the footage. It's like, oh, well, he probably did it to Bones right here when your mind melded with him. So they go to find him, and well, he's
A little nutty at the moment,
Yeah.
where he's talking to people about where he's trying to get back to Genesis.
yeah, and the Federation is like cordoned the sector off because they want to try to keep it under wraps what happened there until they can figure it out, because the Klingons and the Romulans and everyone else would probably dearly love to know that the Federation has developed the Doomsday weapon. And so he's doing that. Scotty's working on the Excelsior and the transwarp drive. And everyone else is just kind of chilling, right? Like, was Uhura assigned to do something? She was in uniform.
Yeah, she was, I think, just doing security for the transporter.
Okay.
But yeah, that's where the plot starts driving. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
we know that, which I always wondered why they had to take the Enterprise out of all the ships and why they couldn't take something smaller, but because of everybody's position, they were able to easily formulate a plan to, hijack.
Basically steal the Enterprise. And
And thinking back on it, out of all of the movies, I'd say that's probably just the most fun of any of the Star Trek movies, at least the original 6, because it was just, it was like, a heist movie at that point.
yeah.
And it didn't take itself too seriously, and, the Klingons that they meet later, were just characters, just over-the-top characters.
Yes, led by Christopher Lloyd as a Klingon.
And but the whole scene about them stealing the Enterprise and the Excelsior going into pursuit, and just
Puttering out. I think everybody has like not that noise, but it's really close to that kind of noise where they try to go to transwarp.
Yep.
Or it's like a transmission stalling out or something. Because a giant spaceship, of course, sounds like that. But no, to your point on the Enterprise, I feel like that's probably because similar to Star Wars, there are people that feel like the Enterprise itself is a character, kind of like the Millennium Falcon almost. I'm not one of those people. Whenever I saw the Force Awakens trailer, I'm not one of those people that peed their pants when they saw the Millennium Falcon. I was like, well, of course the Millennium Falcon's in the Star Wars movie. Like, I wasn't like, oh my god, the Millennium Falcon!
Well,
I don't know what the hell's wrong with those people.
well, and if they also realize that the Corellian YT 1300 freighter is like one of the most common freighters used throughout the entire galaxy.
Sure.
But at the same time, and this is going to sound terrible, but I think I was more saddened by the death of the Enterprise than I was at the death of Kirk's son.
Wow. That's cold. I mean, in all fairness, if you watch the movie, I think Kirk was too. Like, Kirk, once he kills Kluge, like, he goes aboard the Klingon ship and is like, The guy's like, oh, you'll have to kill me to get the information out of me. And he's like, all right, I'll kill you once you tell me. And then he's like, I'm lying, I'll kill you later. It's like, Kirk's already popping jokes and his son's dead. It's not till like Star Trek 6 that it really like 3 movies later that he's like, fuck the Klingons and the horse they rode in on, you know.
Because, I mean, the one scene where they beam down to the planet and you see the Enterprise burning up in the atmosphere, and he's like, my God knows. What have I done?
You know what you always do, Jim? Turn death into a chance at life. Pretty sure that's what Bones says.
Yes.
But yeah, and was that the original or the A?
That was the original, because the A is another Constitution class that they.
And then they get at the very end of 4.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was a refit that was going to be for another ship. I don't know which one it was.
They just rechristened it.
They rechristened it. Yep.
Yeah. So yes, as Jim mentioned, Kirk's son that we just got to meet in the last movie gets killed in this movie. The Klingon commander wants to prove a point, tells his men down there, kill someone, don't care who, and they pass over the 2 Vulcans to kill David. So then the heavily undercrewed Enterprise shows up, fires the 2 torpedoes they have, and then they're like, yes, we're going to surrender, just give us a minute, and they arm the self-destruct. And then they beam down to the surface. And the other Klingons beam over. They're like, "There's no one here, but the computer's saying something." What's it saying? Hang on. 4, 3. He's like, "Get out of there!" Like, where the hell were they going to go in 3 seconds? But yeah, then the Enterprise self-destructs and fiery ruin crashes down to the Genesis planet. And unfortunately, the Genesis planet does not resurrect the Enterprise.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That probably actually accelerated the destruction of the Genesis planet. Was it because of using the nebula or the proto-matter that the planet was unstable?
Yeah, because David took a shortcut.
Apple didn't fall far from the tree there, huh?
But neat thing about the, I don't know if you remember in that scene where the Enterprise is first detonating and it looks like the ship is melting. Styrofoam.
Ah, well, there you go.
Painted styrofoam and they just burn it from the inside.
Well,
it works.
Yeah, you don't have that then. But yeah, so they end up with the Klingon bird of prey, and then they take Bones to Vulcan, and then Uhura is there waiting for him, right?
Yep.
And she was the only one that wasn't there, because were Scotty and Sulu also with him?
Yes, because they piloted the stolen bird of prey back.
Okay. And so then they go to Vulcan and the bird of prey, and they perform the ritual. Well, now they're going to transfer Spock's mind into new Spock's body, basically, because the Genesis planet essentially resurrected him and then aged him very quickly. So he had to go through Ponfar several times, and yeah. So then at the end, like he's walking away, he's like, "You're like Spock," and he's like, "You're Jim." I think is what he says.
Yeah.
"You're my friend." Something like that, you know, so it's acknowledged. So we can tell it is Spock, but he's a little shaky, but it's him. And so that's where that's where Star Trek 3 ends. They never do find out what they did with the one Klingon guy.
I do love the continuity of all of these, because now the first one does not feed into the Wrath of Khan, but the end of Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, 2, 3, and 4 are one continuous chain. It's like a trilogy within the overall set.
Because they get the damaged Enterprise to space dock in the end of the second one, and in the beginning of the third one, they're flying it out of, stealing it out of space dock, blowing it up, stealing a bird of prey, and then from going from Vulcan when they were flying their way back to Earth. And the bird of prey is where the fourth movie will pick back up.
Which is where we'll go now, into Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. And this one has an interesting distinction as being the highest grossing of the original movies. With a budget of $25 million, but a box office of $109.7 million. It's actually the only one that cracks $100 million. And for good reason. A lot of people actually consider this one their favorite. For most people, it's either this one, Khan, or The Undiscovered Country. It is one of the even numbered ones. And a lot of people seem to like this one. And like Jim was saying, they show up back to Earth in the bird of prey, but Earth has apparently come under assault from an alien probe that they realize is trying to communicate with humpback whales, which are extinct at that point because we're idiots and killed them all.
Yeah, because they realize that the probe is focusing not on any of the cities on the planet, but into the ocean. And they're like, well, why is it doing that? And they're like, well, what would it sound like if that sound was heard in the ocean? And they realize it's whale song at that point.
Yeah.
And I guess at that point they're like, well, this one definitely fits in with the time because there was a huge push for.
Yeah, this is one of the Star Trek in general has always had a very, and I know some people consider this a dirty word at the moment, but has had a very progressive social outlook on things, and they've tried to tackle topics that were topical at the time, but they tried to hide it behind a sci-fi plot. Now, sometimes that's very, very lightly hidden. Sometimes it's actually pretty deep in there. But generally speaking, they tried to tackle topics at the time. And this was, I think, the first of the movies that tried to. And like Jim was saying, at the time, and even still now, the whole, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill all the whales in the ocean thing, kind of a big deal. And so this one's a little more on the nose than some of them, but still, it's a really good movie.
It was definitely, well, you guys killed all the whales. That's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. So their big plan is, well, let's go back in time and get a couple of them.
And they act like there's just a walk in the park. It's like, yeah, we're just going to go back in time and grab a couple of whales.
Well, I mean, in the original series, didn't they go back in time like 2 or 3 times? So, I mean, to them it kind of is, probably, but
the fact that they don't have a Federation ship to do it with, that they're going to do it in a Klingon bird of prey.
Yeah.
Which, funny enough, I seen a show or a YouTube episode where they were actually talking about the fact that the humpback whales would not fit on a bird of prey.
Oh, I wouldn't think so. Like, I recently watched the last half of Part 4, and the whales look really small in that tank. Like, I have to believe humpback whales are significantly larger than they appear there.
Yeah. But
also, unless I'm mistaken, doesn't the bridge of the bird of prey change from 3 to 4?
I'm sure it does.
Because, like, in 3, like, Kluge is, like, sitting up there basically on, like, a throne, and, like, the command guy's, like, down there. Whereas in 4, it's more like, it looks a lot more like a Federation ship, just with, like, Klingon aesthetics. Which I think fits more with, like, kind of the Next Generation look the ships had. And that could be why also. Because the Next Generation started in the 80s, late 80s, right?
Yeah.
So that might have been what they had to work with, was a set from the Next Generation instead. That's possible.
That I do not know. But now the time travel, the fact that you don't have Spock, in the past on Earth,
Yeah.
and the only thing he needs to not look alien is to wear a band or wear a headband over his ears.
Yeah. Now, I read an article a while ago about the formula that I mentioned earlier. So this is the one that kind of strains credulity on the whole getting old thing. But essentially it's the whole, like, when you develop dementia, because they're all just kind of stumbling around San Francisco not knowing where they're going.
Yes.
And also Chekhov talking about the nuclear whistles.
Which I'm surprised it wasn't anything. Wasn't there actually a plot where they thought he was like a
Yeah. Once they capture him, like the CIA guy's like, he like turns to the other guy's like, what do you think of? Well, he's a commie. He's like, well, of course he's a commie, but he's like stupid or something, because he keeps talking about the United Federation of Planets and everything. So yeah, they think he's a Russian. Well, I mean, he's obviously Russian, but they think he's a communist spy because he's on board. Well, the Enterprise, the nuclear aircraft carrier, because they have to siphon, is it photons or something, from the reactor so that they can re-energize the dilithium crystals aboard the bird of prey, because the slingshot really drained the energy from them. And he gets stuck there, and ends up going to the hospital, and you see Bones there, and he's like, a 20th century hospital, we've got to save him from those barbarians. And like this one woman, oh, my kidneys, like dialysis. Like, dialysis? What is this, the Dark Ages? Here, take these 2 pills and you'll be fine. Then they go and they're like, "What are you doing, man? Are you chopping open his skull? Get out of here!" Like, oh, let me save this man. Barbarian, just it's great. Bones just going off on 20th century medicine. But yeah, and Spock learning curse words and everything else. Oh, there's the guy on the bus.
Yeah, I was able to mute the radio with the guy's head
Yeah.
after the Vulcan nerve pinch.
Yes, or where Spock swims in the tank to talk to the whales with the mind meld on the whales.
There's also a scene where there's a guy running in the park and runs into the cloaked bird of prey while it's...
Yeah. Yeah, because they land the ship on Earth, so they can get around, and they just land in a park and then activate the cloaking device. And Kirk gets the woman to take him out to dinner. It comes time to pay the bill. She's like, "I suppose you don't have money in the future." He's like, "No, we don't." She's like, "Yeah, of course."
But though, that brings up a good question. If you were in a spot where somebody's like, "Hey, we're going to go into the future where we fly spaceships and all this stuff," would you take that leap and say, "You know what? I'm going to go into the future, even if, regardless if you're there to help resuscitate or bring back the humpback whales or whatever." Just,
in her position, probably, because she was single, didn't seem like she had any other family members, didn't seem like there was anyone she's going to be leaving behind, because obviously when you leave behind, it's going to be long since dead whenever you get there. That would be the only thing that bothered me, I suppose. Because some other characters throughout the series and movies kind of run into that problem. Like there's the Next Generation episode where they land on the one planet that's almost ready for warp drive. And Riker, I think, had to sleep his way out of the hospital, if I recall correctly. There's the woman there that's like, "Take me with you," and Picard's like, "We may never be coming back here in your lifetime." She's like, "Don't care, I'm ready to go." So clearly the answer was yes for her.
well, so that's an interesting thing for people in the comments. What would you do if you had the option to go from the present into the 23rd, 24th century aboard some starships in a Star Trek type future, I guess?
Yeah.
I guess it would really depend because you don't want the Mirrorverse version of the future.
Yeah, you probably would. I suppose if you're evil, you would. You'd fit right in, but yeah, or if you got a killer goatee, maybe. But yeah, probably not the Mirrorverse. But yeah, like I said, a lot of people seem to like this movie, and I think it's because it's largely in the present. There was some commentary on stuff in the 80s too, late 80s where it takes place. Seeing San Francisco radically different than how you'd see San Francisco today if you went there. Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. The time travel aspect, seeing the modern stuff.
And the funny thing is, it isn't the first time that they, one of the first times, at least in the Star Trek, that they talked about manipulating the past. In this example, they gave the one company the formula for transparent aluminum.
Oh yeah, I forgot that whole sequence where they get there, and Scotty and Bones have to get transparent aluminum so they can make.
Well, no, they just needed regular glass, but they needed something to barter with them with. So they gave them the formula for transparent aluminum
because they needed something to build the tanks to hold the water for the whales, because they couldn't just beam them aboard the cargo bay, because then they die. Well, we brought whales, but so they had to get the water too, and so they had to, like Jim said, the glass. And so Sulu also had a side mission. He had to secure a helicopter to bring it there and relearn how to fly it, because he said he flew something like that at the academy, but I think you're really doing like a shuttlecraft. So they get there, and Scotty, "I've come millions of miles." Bones like thousands of miles. It's like, "Oh, here, we'll just use the computer." "Hello, computer." Use the mouse. "Hello, computer." "How about the keyboard?" "Oh, the keyboard. How quaint." It just starts going to town and gives the guy the formula for transparent aluminum.
Which I guess
I think it was Bones was the one that was like, "Well, how do we know this isn't going to mess up anything?" And Scotty's like, "How do we know he didn't invent the thing?" And it's like, all right, fair point. We don't know.
But there was an episode of Enterprise where they did the same thing, where they needed some extra money, and they gave the patent office or sold a patent for Velcro.
There you go. Well, isn't there?
Well, then technically in the reboot movies, Spock, old Spock, gives young Scotty the formula for transport beaming.
Yeah. Then, isn't there an episode or two of Voyager where they're dealing with some guy back in the 90s, and apparently he was a guy from the future and was responsible for like the big tech boom in the 90s, I believe. I didn't watch all of Voyager, but I remember that episode. So I think it was Ed Begley Jr. was the guy playing him. But yeah, so Star Trek 4, it's also got a lot of humor in case that hasn't come through in what we've been saying here. And it's not like goofy slapstick humor. It's genuinely funny humor.
Well, I mean,
it's adult comedy.
I mean,
not adult comedy, but comedy that an adult can appreciate, not a 5-year-old.
Well, I mean, but you throw people back into the past when they've long since gotten rid of money, and expect people to learn how to manage anything. I mean, it's almost like the opposite of when Sylvester Stallone went into the future and didn't know how to use 3 seashells.
Yes.
And that the fact that they never tell you how to use 3 seashells still to this day.
Well, I'm still baffled that we find ourselves almost completely in the Demolition Man future. I never would have guessed that would have been the right dystopian future, but here we are. But yeah, so that's a lot of part 4. They do make it back to the future. The lady scientist that's been helping them comes with them, and Kirk and company have to stand before the tribunal thing, I guess. And basically they're like, well, we're dismissing all the charges on account of you saving the universe and defeating Khan and stopping the Genesis thing from getting out, and basically everything you've done, except for you, Kirk. You disobeyed direct orders, so we're busting you down to the rank of captain and giving you a spaceship. And I'm pretty sure the Klingon and Romulan ambassadors are kind of like... Meanwhile, Sarek is like, he says something to Spock, not quite the whole like, well, I'm glad you're alive again, but you didn't have to stand with him. He's like, well, they're my friends, my crew. And he's like, well, the company you keep speaks volumes about you. They're very honorable people. So it's about as close as you're going to get to, well done, son, from Sarek. So
I do like the fact that they at some point recovered the bird of prey from the bottom of the.
Yeah, as we find out again in Picard season 3 that they did in fact get the bird of prey out of San Francisco Bay, and it's being kept in a facility where like all the other kind of ships of renown are, which at that point also includes the Voyager, the Enterprise D, it's the one from Deep Space Nine,
Defiant.
The Defiant. I think there's an original model Romulan bird of prey there, if I recall correctly, which may be the exact one from, is it Balance of Terror? Is that the name of that episode? Where it's been like destroying things along the neutral zone, and then Kirk and them fight it. And it's the first time they actually see the Romulans.
Yeah, where Spock's like, oh, well, they look like me. Look at that. They also have, I believe, the Stargazer is there as well, because they had the Stargazer from the one episode of the Next Generation, where I guess Picard had killed this Ferengi, and the Ferengi, I guess, restored it. And,
Is that Damon Bach?
yes.
Yeah.
The Stargazer did get towed back, so it would make sense that it would show up. I mean, it was famous for the first ship to perform the Picard maneuver.
So that's about all on Star Trek 4. So that's where we go into Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier, aka The Search for God. Now, this is where we find out that Spock apparently has a brother, Sybok, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, he's a full Vulcan, though, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah. And, yeah, he is trying to find the god of Shakari at the center of the universe. And on some backwater planet that for some reason has a Federation, Klingon, and Romulan ambassador there that hang out at like some nightclub in the middle of some desert in the middle of nowhere, he convinces them all to join him on his grand crusade.
Actually, he has the ability to.
It's got some kind of empathic thing going on, right?
Well, yeah, he can like free people from their pain and suffering and all of that. Now, kind of getting into the plot of the fifth movie. I don't think overall the plot is a bad idea. I mean, why not have a planet where God resides? Why not have a center of the universe? The problem is that I have with it is that one is that someone didn't just fly a ship through there at some point in time. I mean, it's space. You're not going to sell everybody. I mean,
Right.
there wasn't any reason really why no one had been there before. I mean, the Federation is an exploratory body of people. You know, at some point they're just going to be like, you know what, we're going to send a small crew in and see what happens. So there were just a lot of things that I think held it back. And I don't think it's so much that, you know, William Shatner directed it that made it bad.
Oh, actually, to that point, folks, I have to cut you off there, Jim.
No,
Forgot
it's
to mention, the budget on this one was $27.8 million, so a little bit more than The Voyage Home, but the box office is only $52.2 million, which is half of The Voyage Home. So, but also, as Jim just mentioned, Shatner did direct this, and that's actually as a result of a contract negotiation where at some point along the way, Shatner had a clause included where whatever Nimoy gets, he gets. Nimoy had been allowed to direct a movie, I think it's The Voyage Home. And so Shatner got this one, and he got the idea of the plot, because he's the one that came up with the plot, the original version, which was far more expansive. He got it late one night watching a televangelist on TV, basically thinking, what if there was a space version of this guy? You know, essentially. Now, his version had like planets that would be mistaken for heaven and hell with angels and demons, and like the origin of all these things from religious, I don't want to call it mythology, but you know, like what Christianity projects is like heaven and hell and things like that. And this would have been something like the origin for those kind of stories. And it was very expansive, but $27.8 million, even in early 1990s dollars, is just not enough to do that. So they had to seriously scale it back. And that's where we wind up with what we have. Which, to Jim's point, it's not a terrible movie by any stretch. But
And I think that, again, just like I thought the original motion picture had a good plot, just having a good plot isn't going to make a good movie. You have to have a good story, you have to have a good narration, it has to have a good flow. And, you know, a few plot holes here and there, okay, but like I said, them not being able to fly through the Great Barrier when they just fly right through it with no hiccup at all. It needed to have more weight to why nobody had ever gone through there before. And then maybe Cybok had figured out some secret way, like the way to Exegol.
yeah,
Yeah,
Exegol.
Yeah,
That planet we've all heard of.
oh come on, from the
I know. I'm just saying, like,
from the rest. Well, you know what I mean, though. But a secret route that somebody
that you would have had to have learned by playing Fortnite. Right? That's what they announced that originally. But the Emperor wasn't dead.
I wouldn't say-
It wasn't even announced in one of the Star Wars movies. The movie just opens with them knowing the Emperor is not dead because it was announced in Fortnite.
But all things aside, I can still look past that.
Jim takes a far more positive view of the Star Wars sequels than I do. He knows that I'm nothing but negativity.
No, hey, I have nothing but negativity on it as well. I thought The Force Awakens, while not a great movie, it could have salvaged it. I think it had us talking for 2 years about all these what ifs.
Oh yeah, I've said before, The Force Awakens, if it weren't the sequel to Return of the Jedi, or if it just weren't a Star Wars movie, it's a perfectly fine movie. It's got a handful of internal problems, but you can overlook most of them. But my big problem with it is it's Episode 7. That's my big problem with it. To Jim's point, yes. At the very least, we joked about who Snoke was. I was pulling for Porkins, but
No, I was pulling for the one kid from the Senate or from the council chamber room, the one that's like, Master Anakin, what are we going to do?
That would be great.
But
yeah, anyway, back to Star Trek V.
No, I think the opening scene, while a little weird, and I don't know if there's just some reason to get her, stripped down to do a provocative dance, but I'm like,
You don't want to see 50-year-old Nichelle Nichols getting down?
There's nothing wrong with it. I'll just say that. It was all right.
For whatever it matters to folks here, that is actually a complaint about, I think it's Star Trek Nemesis, that some people are like, do we really want to see 50-year-old Riker and Troy getting it on here? Yes, is the answer to that. We couldn't see it in the TV series. People do it. It's a natural part of life. We may as well go ahead and show it.
But I think it started out all right. Yeah, the whole Spock having a brother, and it makes sense that Spock wouldn't really talk much about his, hell, just even getting to talk about his dad.
Yeah.
He is a Vulcan.
Yeah.
Even less about his mom.
It makes sense. I mean, Spock's he plays it close to the chest, So, hell, they never even mentioned the fact he had a sister.
I know. Discovery, no.
Oh, Discovery, the gift that keeps on giving when I want to complain about Star Trek. A sister named Michael, what a thing. But anyway.
So, the fifth one. The problem is that I honestly I can remember just bits and pieces there. I do know
I
that,
mainly remember the beginning and towards the end. The middle, I don't know what the hell happens in the movie.
Well, okay, so
It's them taking over the ship, but that happened pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, because after they were on when they invaded that bar, they got captured, and then Cybok did his mind thing on him, where they were like, yeah, we need to listen to this guy. He's got some points there, or whatever.
Yeah, I guess a lot of it must have been the trip to the other planet, and probably debating things there.
But as I say, the bar scene though was very reminiscent of the cantina. It actually had actual other aliens in there that were first time seen there. I believe one was the cat-like feline aliens.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it. I just know that the Federation representative is played by David Warner, and I think that's the first role he plays in Star Trek, but he plays at least two more.
One in the next movie, too.
He's Chancellor Gorkon in the next movie. And then in the Next Generation, he plays, I don't remember the guy's name, but he's a Cardassian. He's the one that's torturing Picard, trying to get him to tell him there's 5 lights. And I think he plays someone in Deep Space Nine, too, but I'm not sure. He played a bunch of roles. But yeah, the jump just straight from Federation Ambassador to Klingon Chancellor in the next movie, I know what I'll notice.
But no, yeah, you get to that. There was one emotional scene on the Enterprise where Cybok's trying to take the pain away. So I believe he probably would have went and took Kirk's pain away from the loss of the son, or the loss of the Enterprise, whichever. But he does it to Bones, and I guess Bones always had this, I guess, thing for where he let his father die. I guess he found the cure months after his father had passed, and it always haunted him or whatever. But yeah, I think Kirk and Spock were the only two that didn't go through that process. And wasn't there a Klingon bird of prey following him along as well?
That eventually factored into it, yeah. There was a younger commander, and towards the end, the Klingon ambassador had to order him basically to help Kirk.
Yeah, because they wanted to destroy the Enterprise so they could be like, oh, destroy the flagship.
Yeah. Not
realizing it was already taken over by...
Right. Yeah, I think the ambassador makes him apologize to Kirk at the end, if I recall correctly. But, yeah, so they do find something at the center of the universe, which prompts Kirk to ask the most important question in all of fiction. What does God need with the starship? Turns out there's not a good answer to that question. Because that pretty well crippled Cybok's faith in him. And Cybok hit him with the old, I feel your pain. What? giant glowing face that can shoot lightning out of his eyes and everything. And Cyborg tried to do the thing on him.
Well, I think he does.
Yeah, he does. And then I think the bird of prey ends up having to blow it up ultimately.
Yeah, they turned to, I believe it was a prison.
Yeah.
This creature, and that the Great Barrier was meant to keep people out. Which again, like I said, if all they had to do was say you can't fly through the Great Barrier, but Cyborg somehow knew.
Yeah, if he had figured out the secret, or we have to hit it at this exact speed, or like there's a hole right there, kind of thing, something. Or we have to wait for the celestial alignment. I know it happens every 2,000 years, and it's going to happen right now. Something like that. Yeah.
There was also going to be while they were on the planet fighting the giant god space head. There were supposed to be rock creatures. The original budget had rock creatures.
Yeah.
We didn't get any of that. It is.
No, this movie sounds more and more like what the original Dune was supposed to be like. Have you ever seen there's a whole documentary on it. This guy, Jodorowsky, was supposed to film it, and he had the rights, and he wanted to make some weird changes to the plot. I don't even know if he ever actually read the book. He just kind of knew the plot from someone telling it to him. But he had all kinds of bands lined up to do the music for the movie, like House Harkonnen was going to be, I don't know, for argument's sake, I'm going to say Pink Floyd, because Pink Floyd is going to be one of the sets of music, and the Emperor, is going to be the Rolling Stones. Those are just examples. I don't remember the exact bands. I do know that Pink Floyd was one of them. We have each of the houses, each of the groups, one of the bands was going to do their music, so it sounded distinct and everything. And he had convinced, I believe, Salvador Dali to play the Emperor, because he just kept having all these outrageous demands, and finally he agreed to them. And his big plan was, I'm just going to film all of his scenes in one day, because the Emperor's not in much of the movie. But you should watch it. It's called Jodorowsky's Dune. It's a whole documentary on it. This movie would have just changed filmmaking as we know it. And so I kind of get that impression from some of the stuff for Star Trek V that it would have just been a monumentally different movie. It would have been an experience,
Yeah, and like I said, it just budgetary constraints and different things like that. It just was the wrong time for it to come out, and just needed a little bit more work, a little bit more writing. There is one funny continuity error in the movie where they're jetpacking up, or not jetpacking. They got the rocket boots and they're in the turbo shaft of the Enterprise, and they're rocketing up.
Yeah, because that's the one that starts off with them in Yosemite or something like that.
Yes, because
Kirk, Spock, and Bones are on shore leave at I think it's Yosemite. I could be wrong.
Well, it starts off with just Kirk and Bones, because Kirk is climbing up the mountain, and Spock flies up to him and ends up catching him because he
falls. Yeah.
But no, there's a scene in there where they're flying up the turbo shaft with the rocket boots, and there's multiple times where multiple floor numbers go by, and then they go by the same floor again, and then they have 90 decks. Which the Enterprise only has 24, 25 decks.
Yeah.
So it's obviously way more, but obviously it wouldn't be as interesting if it was just real quick shoot. But I don't know why they made the decks taller. It would have been fine. But now but the numbers
better than they're all right, let's go. How far do we have to go? About 30 feet. All right.
Well,
you're stopped by the time you stopped at the same time you started.
There's just some weirdness because they could have made the decks longer or whatever. But there's watch it sometime and you'll see that the numbers that they show them flying by will go from 30 to 40, then back to 30, then 70, and then Another fun fact is, speaking of that, if that's actually in the neck of the Enterprise, I saw somebody do a breakdown of how wide the neck of the Enterprise would actually be based off of the measurements of the ship. 6 meters. And if you're looking at the back of the back of the Enterprise, when you look at the neck, 6 meters.
So just to be clear, we're calling the neck what connects the
saucer section,
the saucer to the engineering with the nacelles.
Yes.
So
yes,
6 meters, huh?
It's an elegant looking ship, but the proportions aren't right for things like that. And they've tried to make things look better. I think that's why the Enterprise D has like the giant neck to it.
Yeah, and the giant saucer.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the D also had to be bigger because it had families on board too. So, and it had more of what we'd expect an actual exploration vessel to have, all the science labs and everything. And
I think
because the A was almost like a warship that happened to do some exploration sometimes. But I think it also comes down to the way the Federation is presented in the original series. It's very much a military organization, whereas by the Next Generation, it's still military because the command structure, but you definitely get the impression that the science folks have more of a control. Well, except for the episode with Drumhead.
You know, I was going to say, this just goes to show that the fifth movie, while it's still important to watch, it's still one that I've watched multiple times, there's just not a lot there. I mean, it's unfortunately, I think, it's still better than, I think I still prefer it over the motion picture. The motion picture is just a giant glamour shot of the Enterprise. I mean, the fact that you spend 4 or 5 minutes just looking at the outside of this model.
So the motion picture is a lot more like 2001: A Space Odyssey than the rest of the Star Trek franchise.
But yeah, like I said, it's a toss-up between the first and the fifth one on which one I think is the worst of the original 6. They're still entertaining. Don't get me wrong. They still
Are they both better than Insurrection?
Insurrection is my least favorite Star Trek movie of all time, and that includes all of the J.J. Abrams.
Harsh, Jim. That's harsh.
And the only reason why is because Insurrection is more like an episode of The Next Generation. It is not a movie. There's just so much ignorance behind it, and I don't know.
Doesn't that one also have the 40 and 50-year-olds getting it on?
Possibly.
Because Riker shaves the beard. That's where it all went wrong. So Riker lost the beard in that one. Because we all know the Next Generation gets much better once Riker acquires the beard.
But I think though when we move on to Star Trek 6, everything is made better. Again, it's we get back to it. You know, a really good story, good special effects, ship-to-ship combat, reuse of the same models again. I mean, the Enterprise model, I believe, was reused for every of the original 6 and going on. And in 6, they get to actually bring back the Excelsior model as well.
Yeah.
Which has now been dubbed from an NX, which is a experimental designation, to now the USS. Or the NCC.
So on that note, it's probably time to move on to Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which is an odd name for a series set in space, but we'll move on. So that one had a slightly higher budget of $30 million, but still not very big. Which is kind of impressive that they managed to have a couple ship battles in the movie and pretty good effects throughout. I think it looks better than 5 overall. But it also had a box office of $96.8 million. So the series went out with a bang, and I think you can tell that I think everyone on board knew this was the last of the. I don't think this was like we're not making money, let's not make anymore. I think it was we've had a good run. This is a fitting conclusion. And as we explain the plot, it'll make sense why here. But you're about to say something there, Jim?
Well, one of the things I was going to say is that I believe this is the one movie where they came up with one of the most reused pieces of Star Trek footage ever, which is the
bird of prey exploding.
The bird of prey exploding, because I'm pretty sure
it's used in Generations,
and it's used in the Next Generation episodes. It's used actually, I think it's used in Generations when they blow up the bird of prey in Generations.
It is, yeah. It's the same shot. It's slightly lightened up a little bit, so the colors of the bird of prey look a little different, but it's the same shot.
Yeah, and there's many times that they've used this. Pretty much any bird of prey exploding is the exact same shot,
Yeah.
used over and over again. They got their money worth out of this one shot. But no, the other thing is that I think the Undiscovered Country is obviously not based on any sort of actual country. It's
something.
It's breaking new ground.
What was it? Was it Kirk's dad that said it? It was someone said it. He described it as the future is the undiscovered country. You know, essentially the future is the unknown, unlimited possibility is what it represents. But it was a very terrestrial saying. It just, you know.
So it starts off with that's with the destruction of Praxis, right?
Yes.
Which is a moon of Kronos, isn't it?
Yeah, it's where the Kronos is the Klingon homeworld, and Praxis is where they mine. It's their main dilithium source, and so there's something happens, and Praxis explodes, which releases a tremendous amount of radiation. And given its proximity to Kronos, it's irradiated the planet essentially. So the Klingons realize that they're going to have to evacuate their homeworld, and they can't do it alone, so they have to sue for peace with the Federation and hope the Federation will help them. And so that's what the plot revolves around. That's kind of what I talked about in a little bit of the intro there, because this movie is like the capstone to the original series, essentially. This is the end of the Federation-Klingon conflict. This is how it ends, and how in the Next Generation, which was already going at that time, we see that the Klingons and the Federation are allies, and this is how it happens. And there are forces on both sides, plus the Romulans, who do not want to see that happen. Turns out both sides have a military-industrial complex that would like to keep the war going, and they're perfectly fine working together to fight each other. War makes strange bedfellows, is all I can say. But to my mind, this whole thing was probably, I'm not going to say set in motion, but there's an episode in the original series, I want to say it's called The Squire of Gothos, but I could be wrong on that, where the Klingons have seemingly taken over a world that appears to have like medieval level technology. And so Kirk and Spock sneak down there, and they're trying to like start a rebellion or something against the Klingons, because the whole Klingon Federation conflict is a metaphor for the Cold War. That's important for this whole little story's going. So they go down to the planet, the Klingons capture them, and then the guys that live there basically tell the Klingons and the human and the Federation that no, all this is just a setup. Like, they're powerful energy-based beings, and all this is just to have like a frame of reference so that mortal races can interact with them. And they tell them, and instantly, like once they demonstrate their power, I don't remember which Klingon it was, it's one of the ones in a few episodes, and shows up again in Deep Space Nine. But he instantly turns to Kirk and is like, Kirk, let's put aside our differences, I think we can take them. And so instantly he realizes the bigger threat, knows the Federation knows how to fight, and is like, all right, well, this is our only chance. And like I said, war makes strange bedfellows. And the alien tells him, is like, basically kind of like, it's odd that you would do that, because I see in your future that your peoples will stand together one day. And both sides are just like, oh, I don't think so. And they use their power to literally like stop the impending war between the Federation and Klingons all across known space. And it ends with the Klingon, Kirk's like, well, I guess the war will have to wait. And the Klingon's like, it would have been a beautiful war, Kirk. We'll see you out there. And I think this is like the culmination of that. It's finally, something happens, the two races can finally bury the hatchet. It's also a metaphor.
You mean bury the bat'leth?
Yes, bury the bat'leth. That's much better, Jim. But yeah.
And not into someone's skull.
Well, maybe the wrong ones. They're duplicitous bastards. But so the movie itself, though, is also a metaphor for the end of the Cold War. Praxis is a metaphor for Chernobyl. The Soviets suffered this massive, catastrophic incident in an energy-generating area, and a short time later, they didn't have to sue for peace, but they did allow Westerners in to try to help, and that was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. I mean, aside from their terrible economic policies and all the other problems that would eventually come crashing down, but like that was like the moment. And so it ends with, you know, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And at least in the 90s, it kind of looked like we were going to have peace with Russia. We were optimistic fools, but you know, maybe one day, not today. But yeah, so the whole movie is kind of a metaphor for that. And yeah, even now, there are people on both sides that want to keep essentially the Cold War going and would probably ally to do so if they could. Or maybe they have, I don't know. But I'm not going down conspiracy theory like that, folks, just throw it out there. So, yeah, the movie's a metaphor for that. And against that backdrop, we see a lot of things. Again, David Warner shows back up as Gorkon, Chancellor Gorkon, ruler of the Klingon Empire. We also have Christopher Plummer as General Chang. For those of you who saw season 3 of Picard, the woman shapeshifter who was after them throughout most of the series, that's Christopher Plummer's daughter. So there's a legacy there. Also, Kim Cattrall plays the Vulcan. Interesting side note, she posed nude for Playboy on the bridge set right around that time too. For those of you who want to know those kind of things. And we also get Christian Slater in a random cameo appearance. Anyone else?
Tuvok, but not Tuvok.
Yeah. Tuvok is not Tuvok.
Even though I think later in Voyager they retconned that it was Tuvok.
Yeah, because Vulcans live a long time.
Yeah, they never explained why even that 20 years.
Then I believe the Federation president is, what's his name that plays Red Foreman? Also the bad guy in RoboCop.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's the Federation president. So yeah, there's several other stars that randomly show up in this one for some reason as opposed to all the others. But Kirk, very much like the whole "hey, the Klingons killed my son" like comes back with a vengeance for Kirk in this one. And because Spock, I think it's Spock. It might have been Kim Cattrall's character. I think it's Spock that asks Kirk like, "Well, should they all die for that?" And Kirk says, "Yes, they should." You know, and that's hatred from Kirk's part speaking. And a lot of the movie is him having to accept that, you know, a Klingon killed his son, not every Klingon, and they don't all deserve to die because of it.
But
and again, that comes back to the whole aging thing, and this is the can you look past old prejudices and move on? You know, can you accept that maybe you were wrong?
And that moment, because yeah, somehow his, you know, in the movie his personal log gets leaked out to the Klingons, and that's where they're like drives the whole plot of the movie. But at the same time, was also one of the biggest reasons why, hey, there's something fishy here. It's like, well, how did they get this?
Yeah,
random.
Yeah, because what happens is Gorkon gets killed. Well, the Enterprise is supposed to escort Gorkon to Earth, I believe, and to start peace talks. And the Klingons come aboard. They have a big state dinner. Everyone drinks the old Romulan ale. It's illegal everywhere, and so a lot of truth starts flowing on both sides, and some truth a lot of people don't want to hear. Chang's a big fan of Shakespeare and the original Klingon, apparently, and yeah. So then it's after that you know Kirk's like basically screw them all, and hope they all die. And yeah, then someone beams aboard Gorkon's ship.
Well, so what happens at first is that it appears that the Enterprise fires upon Gorkon's
check out
ship.
the gravity.
And then somebody beams aboard wearing
gravity boots and a Federation suit, but with their helmet, so you can't see them.
Yeah.
And they take out Gorkon and some other members of his cast, of his crew there. And Bones and Kirk beam over to try to help, and Gorkon dies, so they take them prisoner. And
yeah, poor Bones. He's just there trying to save them. And they're like, "Hey, if you would have only known more about our physiology, you could have saved this man. He's like, I did mine.
Yeah, so then they get sent to trial with Worf as their attorney. I'm assuming that's like Worf's ancestor, because it can't be actual Worf.
Well, I believe, and I believe that's even mentioned. That it's a
Yeah, but his name is Worf.
Yes. Yes.
And it's played by
Michael Dorn.
Michael Dorn. So. But yeah, so they get found guilty and get sent to the gulag at Rua Penthe. And that's where they meet a changeling, but probably not one of the Deep Space Nine changelings, or maybe it was.
I don't-
It's hard to say.
Because I don't think she turned to goo and had to sleep in a bucket.
Right. Although that was before Deep Space Nine, so. Right?
Yeah.
So. Also an alien that keeps his genitals in his knees, apparently.
Yeah.
Bad for him, good for Kirk.
That seems like a very terrible place. 'Cause
Yes.
If you kneel down for anything, they're crushing your neck.
Yes, you would think so, but
Also, if they give you a D, that's
yeah.
a little weird.
But yeah, so you see Sulu is now in charge of the Excelsior. He's the captain there, and he's kind of dealing with Spock and like, hey, so if you need anything to rescue the captain, like, I got your back. And they do go rescue the captain, so figure out where he is, because right as he was leaving to get on the turbo lift, Spock slapped something on his back, which you can clearly see in the movie if you don't look for it. And it's a tracking device. And
It also makes you wonder though, why would they have never changed their?
why did they never change their uniforms? Why didn't they put them in like a prison outfit or anything?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're gonna go get rescued, and right as they're about to, like, the prison guards apparently are in on the plot, because they're the ones like, well, since you're about to die, I'll tell you everything, and then they get beamed up, and he's like, Spock, damn it, they were gonna tell us everything. Well, we could send you back. No, forget it. So they piece together that Kim Cattrall's character is in on it, which they're kind of surprised. She's a Vulcan. The Romulan ambassador.
But Vulcans, there's extremist Vulcans, and there's also extremely logical Vulcans who think, well, the Klingons are never going to be someone we can trust.
Yeah.
But it started with the fact that the Klingons had his personal log. That was the start of it. Obviously, tracing back the boots.
Yeah. They as Kirk and Bones are dealing with their the Klingon justice system, the Enterprise is trying to figure out what the hell happened, because as Spock points out, the logs say that they fired the torpedoes, but the torpedoes are still there, right?
Yes.
So either someone did something with the torpedoes or someone changed the logs, but either way, someone on the ship did something. So they know someone on the ship is in on the plot. Plus there's the gravity boots, and because they know they beamed from the Enterprise over there and back. They run into a few problems like, well, why wouldn't they just vaporize them? And they're like, well, here's why. And they fire a phaser and it sets off all the alarms, which that's the first time in Star Trek history, and I think the only time that ever happens. Like every other time phasers are being fired on the ship, those alarms would go off. But
plot.
Yeah.
It had to be there. So you had that, and then they find two dead crew members that the boots belong to.
Right, and they were killed. So they're like, well, how did they kill them? Like, well, the phaser was set to stun, but it was a point-blank range to the temple, so it was fatal. Because the other way it was set to disintegrate. That's how it set off the alarm.
But they were, they got kind of a clever idea. They said, well, let's say that one of these people isn't dead.
Yeah, to draw out whoever killed them. Yeah.
Yes.
Which ended up, what is her name? Off the top of your head? Anyway, Spock learns everything about mind building with her because she won't talk. And, they also figure out that the Klingons have to have a bird of prey that can fire while cloaked, which is a new thing. Up to that point, they had to decloak to fire. And everyone's like, was that possible? And Spock's like, well, I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, but it says, an ancestor of mine posited that once you eliminate the impossible, whatever is left, however improbable, must invariably be the truth. For those of you who don't know that quote, that's from Sherlock Holmes. Spock implying that one of his ancestors was Sherlock Holmes. But yeah,
Well, human ancestor.
I mean maybe but or at least Arthur Conan Doyle. So I don't know if he had any kids. Well, he has an estate, so maybe he did. Let's look that up. But yeah, so they deduced that, okay, well, the torpedoes had to come from somewhere. We never detected another ship, so it had to be a cloaked ship that could fire while cloaked.
And then
And then Uhura is the one that comes up with the means to track them, which boils down to, well, the thing has to have a tailpipe, because it's got a reactor that has to have emissions of some kind.
and it has to put out a lot of emissions to be able to do what it does. So.
Yeah. So Spock and McCoy jury-rig a torpedo because the Enterprise figures out where the talks are going to be at Camp Kittimer. The Excelsior's flying to meet them there, and of course the Klingons are already there. The Klingons who want to continue the war, because since Gorkon's dead, his daughter takes over, and she is still pushing for peace with the Federation. Even though Chang tried to give her the old, like, your father died, following this train of thought, you might want to reconsider. What she took more is like, no, my father died for this, it's worth fighting for. And of course, I like Mr. Scott at one point, Klingon bitch, she's not even crying. Spock, the Klingons don't have tear ducts, Mr. Scott. So she literally couldn't cry. But is 6 the one where Scotty just completely gives up hiding the fact he's missing one of his fingers? I know it's one of the movies that he finally just stops. For those who don't know, the guy that plays Scotty, James Doohan, yeah, I don't remember if it's right or his left, but he's missing one of his fingers. And you can never tell in the old series because the way he always held himself and held his arms, but in one of the movies he finally stops hiding it, and you can see it, notice it. But yeah, so they get there, and they've got the Klingon ship keeps hammering them, but then they finally fire the one torpedo, and all throughout this, Chang's just been going on and on and on and Shakespearean, and it's final, like once he fires the torpedo, he finally comes to the to be or not to be, and then as the torpedo's about to hit, not to be.
Because after the first one hits, and they just
Then they just targeted the explosion. The Enterprise and the Excelsior just hammered it. Well, a bird of prey is a much smaller ship. It can't take a whole hell of a lot of pounding and blows up.
Yeah, I was gonna say in normal combat, I mean, even the Enterprise A would have been a match. The Excelsior would have been overqualified to destroy it.
So yeah, so then they beam down and they stop. Someone is going to assassinate the Federation president, disguised as a Klingon, but it's actually a human. And is that the guy that the actor that plays Odo played him? Because he plays a Federation guy in these movies too.
That I did not know.
I'll have to look that up, folks, real quick. But anyway, so they stopped the assassination attempt, and it was meant to look like the Klingons assassinated the Federation president to respark the war. And like I mentioned earlier, the Romulans were in on it, so the Federation people beamed down like a couple of different groups, and they stopped the Romulan ambassador. They stop. He's a black guy. I think it was Colonel West, maybe. He's with the Federation military, and he's down there like in the audience, and I know he's part of the plot. So they stop him, and then they go to stop the assassin up in the balcony. And I think Scotty's the one that shoots him.
Shoots him out the window.
Yeah.
Well, when you're looking that up, one thing I was doing some research on it now, the Excelsior model.
Valeris is Kim Cattrall's character. It's just a note.
That according to lore, or I guess now canon, that the Excelsior class was used for over 100 years.
Really?
Yes. I mean, that's why, like in the Next Generation, they're still using the Excelsior class. It's been refit multiple times. That and not having to build a new model. Half of the new ships in the Next Generation, Voyager and Deep Space Nine, were all just kit bashed. models of other ships.
And which one?
But,
Which one are they kit bashed?
all the next generation, half the ships are just other ships being kit bashed to make new ships.
Admiral Cartwright is the black guy. I can't think of his name. Brock Peters plays him. I don't see it in here. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's okay to be wrong.
I know, but it's going to help if I just go to the actor instead. Because I know he plays a Federation guy in one of the movies.
But no, I think it was. I think the send off was good. It was you had some space battles again. I think you get more space battles in Star Trek than you have in the Star Wars movies as of late. You don't understand that whole battling in space. No, I think it was a good send off, even though technically, I guess Generations was the final send off.
Yeah, I mean this was the last of the crew all together. I consider this the send off. But you're right, it's not the last appearance.
Now, do you find it weird though that there was that one episode of The Next Generation where they had McCoy in it as 150 years old?
That's the first episode, isn't it?
It's one of them, and then Generations you had Kirk, and like I said, a good handful.
Well, I mean, Spock showed up in the Next Generation, but he is a Vulcan. He lives longer. And Scotty was stuck in the transporter.
I'm like his poor comrade that didn't survive that.
Yeah, well, I like how in at least from what I've seen so far of Strange New Worlds, the doctor there knows that trick, and his daughter's looped in there. I might have been mistaken. I could have sworn he was in one of the movies. But I'm past where that would have been. Oh well. It happens.
So, any other closing thing? What I think just the fact that how long we actually talked about Star Trek 6 versus how much we could find to talk about the fifth one just goes to show that a good story, having a good story and a good plot and combination. There's a lot more to talk about versus if you just take a good idea and just write it poorly.
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek 6 is obviously the better movie. There's a lot more to it. And again, it really does feel like the culmination of everything up to that point. It is the end of the war with the Klingons, And that's the driving plot point of the original series. So
I just realized that technically the next 6 movies lead to the culmination of the peace with the Romulans.
Yeah. At the end of Nemesis is when the peace negotiations begin, and then somewhere between there and Picard is where they do finally make peace, and then Spock goes back in time to try to stop the. He doesn't intentionally do it, but to stop the supernova that's somehow going to threaten the galaxy.
No, it just blows up Romulus.
Oh, I know, but in the movie they said it was threatening the galaxy, and that was one of those moments where I was like, don't know about that. I don't think that's how that works, but okay, JJ.
And the same thing, like a Romulan mining ship that can take out even a very old Federation fleet.
Well, there's deleted parts. It's been upgraded with Borg technology somehow or another. Is why. And but yeah, kind of like the parts they're taking out where they were also taken prisoner by the Klingons.
Yeah, which would have made a better movie.
Yeah.
It was still a good movie, but we'll have to get into that at some point.
I wouldn't mind seeing more there. It'd have to be a series or something at this point, probably. But really change some things. I saw some people had some interesting ideas online. With the destruction of Vulcan, maybe now the Andorians have a bigger say in the Federation. So that maybe the Federation is more militaristic, not like Mirrorverse, but
what about the Vengeance?
Yeah, the bigger, blacker, eviler Enterprise. Yeah, just things like that. how the third one had that callback to like Enterprise era stuff going on with the ship that was crashed there, and things like that. But yeah, to your point, like the events of Nemesis heavily influenced all 3 seasons of Picard. Data dying, the piece with the Romulans, and all that. It all heavily influenced the 3 seasons of Picard. And yeah. So,
we'll have to do a retrospective on those movies at some point as well. I think, kind of in conclusion with, with the original series movies, original cast movies, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I think they still hold up today. I mean, when we went to go see the Wrath of Khan in theaters,
yeah,
it still holds up. And I don't know. It's just there's a thing in the way that they did filmmaking back then. It seems like the Wrath of Khan will always hold up way better than Star Trek Into Darkness.
Well, I think this is just me because I kind of see this with the original trilogy of Star Wars movies too. Now, maybe it's just because I'm used to seeing them that way, and that's what I saw first. But it's because so many of the effects are practical effects, and so they look, for lack of a better word, they look real. Okay. Now, there's CGI that looks really damn good out there, but it all has a ticking clock on it because it's always improving, and it still hasn't hit the it looks real because it's not real.
Yeah, I mean, good example, Avengers Endgame. I mean, while the fight scene at the very end was awesome, it's going to be dated at some point in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell everything except for like a couple of people were all not there, just computer generated.
Right, and it's the way I hear a lot of people explain it is that the things appear weightless. They just don't look like they truly occupy a space with real gravity and dimension to them. And I think like the newer Star Wars movies, a lot of that's CGI, but it's really good CGI. Like I despise them plot wise, but the new Star Wars movies look fantastic, and I have to applaud them for keeping the aesthetic of the old movies, because I'm sure there were people that are arguing like, oh no, there's got to be holograms and lens flare. Like, no, these are ships operated by switches, knobs, and dials, damn it, because that's the way they look. And whoever made that decision should be kept there, unless somehow that was also Kathleen Kennedy, because in that case the evil she's done far cancels that out. But I'm just saying, because if you look at the Star Trek reboot, and even like Strange New Worlds, the other shows, like they look futuristic they look like the future of the original series. Like if you were to take their vision of the future, is what that looks like now, instead of trying to copy that look, which is what they should have done, because the other shows aren't going anywhere, in my opinion.
But there's something with the practical models that just looks a lot better. I mean, again, I go back to the Wrath of Khan, the scene when Reliant just rips into the side of the Enterprise. It looks like something actually being shot. The burns, the damage. That's what
or like your like the Bird of Prey explosion shot. Like you can tell that's a real physical thing blowing up. You can tell that's not pixels. Like that's a real model being blown to bits.
I mean,
isn't there an episode of the Deep Space Nine that's like the last episode that they used models on, and they just used like all of them essentially and blew most of them up in the process? It's one of the big battles. I don't think it's the big battle over Cardassia. I think it's one involving the Klingons. But someone was talking about it one day, and I never did figure out which episode it is, but I think it's one of those. And it's the last one that uses models. And then from that point forward, Deep Space Nine uses CGI.
Now, I do know there is an episode, I think it's the Next Generation, where they're at a scrap yard, and they're floating in space, and half of the models in that are prototype models for different ships that they didn't go through.
That's the episode where the Romulans are going to invade Vulcan. They've got ships hidden there or something, or they've been taking ships from there because they know no one's going to miss them. Yeah.
But anyways, practical models
Yeah.
look good. I mean, obviously, like I said, there was a couple of things, especially like in the motion picture, where they tried to make it look like you could see from the outside of the ship, looking into a shuttlecraft to see Scotty and Kirk, and it's
Yeah, I mean, nothing's perfect. Like, I
It's-
know I mentioned it in another video on here, I just don't remember which one, but we've talked about Terminator 2. Terminator 2, all kinds of fantastic special effects throughout the movie. And then there's that scene where they're driving at night, it's a steer jerker scene. They're in the cop car, and it's clearly the fake background, like a 1950s car chase. And it's like, man, James Cameron, did you just like run out of money at that point? Or is that one of those like, you know, it's worked for 100 years in movies. No reason to fix this. We got liquid metal guys to make. So no, and nothing's perfect. You know.
And I'd say the other one is that they used a lot of matte paintings in the first movie, the motion picture. They weren't quite up to the quality of what Star Wars had with their matte paintings. Because there was a times where I'm looking at some of the Star Wars stuff and I'm like, that's a matte painting. That looks like an actual set. Versus here, there were a couple of ones that were like, yeah, that's a little. But then the special effects that they've done in some of the other ones, like there's ones where they made like an entire set out of putting stuff closer to the camera and having people stand at a certain spot to give the illusion that there's this entire elaborate
Yeah.
scene that they're standing in, but really they're just standing in a room with a bunch of crap in front of the camera.
No, I mean,
It works.
no, you want to see some terrible matte painting stuff, watch the movie Hawk the Slayer sometime. Like, there's like the matte painting, and then it's like a person like moving, and it does not work at all. Like, not at all.
What was that?
Not nearly as bad as the glowing bouncy ball of doom scene, but or the guy that got killed with silly string. But I did a whole video on that, folks. You should watch it. In case I forget to link to it up here, but check it out.
Well, we're
But yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say on the movies.
so we got 2 hours in on this, just about.
All right.
So if you guys can sit through and listen to all this, definitely comment on it.
I'll probably break it up in editing. So
And even then, if they want to watch part 1, part 2, or if we break it into 6 parts,
yeah, I'll probably. Well, folks, depending on how you're watching this, I have either broken it up per movie or per like chunks of time or something, or I have just let it go. Because there's one really long video we did one time that I broke up into 3 parts, but then I also posted just the whole full length thing. I'll get it right here in a second. And that might be what I do here. I might post the individual segments and then post the full length with timestamps or something. But at any rate, if you're watching the full length one, or if you just watched one of the others, or since I'm probably just going to take this scene right here and slap it at the end of each of the videos, so I don't have to record this 6 times. It's a little editing trick for those who don't know. Thank you for watching. Definitely comment down the bottom. Do you want to see more of us talking about the others? Any particular part of these you might want to know more about? Want to know about like other random movies that DeForest Kelly, Leonard Nimoy, or William Shatner are in by any chance? We can talk about Night of the Lepus. You want to hear about giant rabbits terrorizing Texas? I think it's Texas.
or if you want to know more about obscure video formats like the one shown here,
Yeah. I'll be able to dig up a Betamax somewhere. But yeah, just let us know. You want to hear about the other Star Trek stuff? Once Strange New World Season 2 comes out, we'll probably do a video once all the episodes are out. We might do weekly things, but that's probably a little taxing on our schedule. So we'll probably do a wrap up once they're all out. But otherwise, thanks again for watching. Comment. But otherwise, like, share, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. But otherwise, make it so.
engage.
Engage. That's better. We'll go with that.